I think most artists who've taken commissions or contract work probably know the pain of working nonstop only to look over at your to-do list and go, oh shit, there's still more. It seems to almost be in our nature to overlook our own boundaries, and on top of that, sometimes life just says no when you try and take on what feels like a normal amount of work. Burnout is a constant threat looming over the shoulders of young creatives, and while I feel like I need to revisit how I handled that personally, I wanted to make a bit of a guide for myself and anyone else stuck dealing with the more immediate issue. Because there's a solid 9 out of 10 chance that most people in this position can't afford to just refund everyone so they can finally rest. And being a professional or semi-professional, you have to get the work done. So I want to break it down into 6 steps. And I did this both because I like numbers and YouTube likes numbers, so we're gonna go with it. So what do you do? Step 1, do not take on more work. I'm not joking around. This isn't just a suggestion. I don't care what kind of emergency comes up. If it's at all possible to avoid, do not take on anything else. If you can afford to, cancel your Patreon or anything else for a month to give yourself some time. If you're like me and your literal livelihood depends on that, then fine, keep that. And for the love of the gods, do not take on a single new commission or project outside of that. Step 2, make a plan. I'm going to go into my suggested methods to attack your to-do list, but the most important thing is to get an estimate. An estimate high, you will probably increasingly lose your ability to work extreme hours the more you need to do as a result of the stress, and have that number ready. You'll need it for step 3. For what it's worth, my projected calculations usually come up to 3 to 4 months to finish everything. And it usually ends up being just under 2 that I actually spend catching up. That's what I mean when I say estimate high. I would always rather surprise a client by being done early or on time than have to let them know that another extension is needed. Step 3, you have to communicate. Start by posting a notice on your main social and anywhere you have a subscriber base. So for example, for me, that would be Ko-Fi, Patreon, Toy House, and Tumblr. That's where most people follow me. That's where I get the majority of my commissions through. That's where I have artwork that I do for my subscribers. If you have individual commissioners or patrons who are waiting on art, you are going to want to reach out to them individually. As stressful as that can be, it's the professional thing to do, and you're conducting yourself as a professional, so you got to do the grown-up crap. Something that is key to keep in mind, though, for both of these, you need to keep the pity party to your friend group. That sounds really harsh, especially because I just sound harsh naturally. But what I mean by this is you can offer some details about the situation. I would keep it to 1 sentence, if that. So for example, I had some health complications come up that caused delays, or I had a family emergency to take care of and I wasn't able to work on art. Or honestly, it will gain you a lot of trust to just be honest if this is the case and say, I bit off more than I can chew. The main point is that your clients and your subscribers don't need a lengthy explanation. They don't need to know every other detail. They don't need to know how exhausted you are or how tired or guilty you feel. They need to know that you are going to get their work done, that they paid for. And if you want to go into a little bit more detail on the public post, then that's kind of a your mileage may vary thing, you know, because people are subscribed to you or following you for you, presumably, so they might want to make sure you're okay. But again, it's really important to keep your tone away from the self-pitying. And I really don't have any advice on how to do that. But the next key thing to keep in mind is what I said in step 2 about estimating high on your new completion deadlines, your extensions. If you think that you're going to finish your client's piece by the end of the week, just say it could take 2 or 3. Don't mess around with their time and money by assuming you'll be working at your best every single day while you're already behind. And finally, your client might ask for a refund. This is why it's important to have information on how you handle those in your terms of service. I've gone ahead and linked my terms of service in the description so you can sort of see how I do it, but it's important to keep in mind that every artist has different standards, and many clients will have different standards that they expect as well. If you don't have anything in your terms of service about refunds, it is honestly best to just work that out with the client as they've requested. Word of mouth is our bread and butter as artists, and more than that, you don't want anyone walking away from commissioning you with a bad taste in their mouth, feeling like they almost got scammed, or that they did get scammed. And if you take money and don't deliver art, you've scammed someone. Now, you might not have the funds on hand immediately, which I think is probably pretty common, especially if you took on all that work for an emergency. But it is also a good idea, if you can, I definitely can't always do this myself, to keep a small savings for this purpose. Then you'll need to negotiate both how much of a refund you're able to do. My personal recommendation is a full refund if you haven't started, and partial if you're halfway done or more. But again, your mileage may vary, and so may your clients. And you need to make a plan to issue that refund. Do not miss a payment, and especially do not miss a payment without warning and communication. Things come up, and in my experience, a lot of clients are incredibly understanding of that. But again, you can't mess around with this. You just can't. So now that I've got the scolding teacher part out of the way in step 3, it's time to talk about step 4. It's the part that you've probably been putting off. Actually getting the work done. I told you earlier to make a plan, but what does that plan actually look like? It's so easy to be just crippled by how much there is to do and feel completely paralyzed. So here, I'm going to outline 2 approaches that generally work for me at different times. Your mileage is going to vary here. These might not work for you, and you might have to come up with your own, but I figure at least it's a starting point. Either way, you're going to want to grab whatever playlist gets you the most pumped up to draw, and you're probably going to want to turn the volume up all the way if you're anything like me. Just remember to take care of your ears if you're using headphones. Plan A. For me personally, my private commissions are broken down into types. I typically offer traditional sketches, traditional ink illustrations, digital speed paints, and custom designs. I know already how difficult and work-intensive each of these types of project is, and I'll start with whatever's easiest to finish quickly. I think those productivity influencers call this like a snowball effect, where basically you start with small tasks to get the ball rolling and run off the endorphin high of crossing something off. So for me, this looks like either tackling the traditional sketches first, or if I've already got sketches done for ink work, finishing those and then moving back to the sketches. Then bust speed paints, and finally the full speed paints, and then the customs. Because I'm someone who gets pretty easily understimulated thanks to ADHD, I do like to maintain a bit of a ratio to change things up. I'll usually try and knock out 2 of whatever my easiest work is, then work on one of the bigger ones for one work session, which for me is usually between 4 and 6 hours at a time, but can get to upwards of 8 or 10 or even 12 hours if I get really absorbed, before going back and then doing 2 more of the easiest pieces, and repeating this until I run out of the smaller works. Then I'll repeat the process, fully finishing 1 of the second easiest work, and working a short while on a bigger piece in between. So for me, for example, this would look like working on 2 sketches and then maybe getting something rough done on a custom, and then doing 2 more sketches and then cleaning up that rough sketch in the custom, and then 2 more sketches and I'm done with sketches. So now I work a little more on the custom and I start inking something. I hope that kind of gives a good idea of how it works. For me, this is a really good way to get the actual to-do list to look smaller as quickly as possible. Just remember that once it starts looking manageable again, that is not a cue to take on more work. Get that thing empty, and then, if you can, give yourself a solid week or 2, even a month, before you take on anything else. You will thank me if you listen. And then, moving on to Plan B, my second method is one that I use less frequently, because generally when I back myself into a corner like this, it tends to have happened all at once, so not many things are sitting for an excessive amount of time. But when you do have a commission that you feel like you've taken a huge amount of time, way too long on, it can be a massive source of anxiety. Even or especially when it's a huge project that you already knew would take a long time, it can feel so good to finally be done with it. And it can also be a huge relief for a client, particularly when that client's paid a significant sum. And it can help keep up a good relationship with them to focus on these things first. Remember that before this, you should have communicated clearly your new deadlines with your clients, and you should have picked which of these approaches you're taking before you begin executing them. This method should, hopefully, see some clients getting their work before your promised date. Because what you're going to do is you're going to utterly throw yourself fully into one project at a time, starting from the earliest work and working towards the most recent. It is especially imperative that you do not take any new work on in this method, because with it, your to-do list size is probably not going to significantly decrease, and the anxiety of looking at it is still going to be there, meaning you are going to want to focus only on the steps of the one thing you're working on, and not really look at the to-do list as a whole until you've finished your first piece and you're moving on to the next. This method is going to help most with reassuring clients who've waited a long time, especially if they're people who don't work with you regularly. If you don't have a solid reputation for finishing your work you take on, then this is also going to be a good choice, because it kind of reinforces that chronological completion rather than making it look like, oh, you'll finish this thing that you took on last week, but not something that you took on 2 months ago. That can be a huge source of damage for an artist's reputation. Obviously, it's ideal to never be in this situation, but if you get there, then this is definitely one way to ensure that doubts are at a minimum. Step 5 is to take a break. I'm serious, take a fucking break and rest. you probably already pushed yourself to the edge of burnout by the time you realize you're in trouble. And by the time you're finally caught up, not only will you probably feel like your hands are going to fall off, but this sort of situation is a homing beacon for existing issues like depression and anxiety to swoop in and just devastate you. Taking steps during the work process, like stopping to go for walks or sit outside a few minutes, as well as making sure you stop and stretch at least once an hour. Seriously, look up artist stretches, do them once an hour, even if you're not in like a crash catch-up phase like this. Stretch once an hour when you're drawing. But these things can make a world of difference. And when you are finally caught up, it is extremely important to just make sure that you take a good, proper rest, whatever that might look like for you. Go see a movie, play a video game for 8 hours, hang out with friends, go out to eat if you're able, and I mean, like, if you can, just leave the house and sit somewhere else. Sit somewhere that is not the room that you do your work in. Any room that you do your work in. If you're someone like me who sometimes works in the bedroom, in the kitchen, in the living room, don't sit in any of them. Just don't look at the same walls anymore, if you're able. I'm not kidding when I say, like, find the nearest park and lay in the grass for an hour if the weather and your health allow it. Just full-on starfish pose under a tree. You'd be amazing how helpful that can be. And finally, step 6. After you've gotten caught up and after you've had your time to rest and let your mind and body recover from this experience, it's time to take steps to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Like I said at the beginning, this seems to be kind of inevitable, especially for young creatives and those of us in more dire financial situations, but you can absolutely take steps to, at the very least, reduce how bad it gets next time. Look back on how much work you took on and in what time frame. Thinking about putting a limit on the slots when you open commissions. You can always add more if you finish quickly and you're ready to go, but it's a lot harder to take away slots once they're filled. If you already have a slot limit, lower it by at least 1 or 2, and maybe more depending on the current number. If you've got like 10 slots for something, just cut that in half. If it was 1 or 2 massive projects holding you back, think about how you can streamline that process, or maybe just hold off on taking another project like that until you feel that your skill set is more prepared to handle that kind of a workload. I hope this video can be helpful to others. I know for me, it did a lot just to put this process down in writing when I was making the script. It's one that I've had to follow and revisit more than once in the last 5 years alone. And each time I have, it has made me better at not needing it again. Between the hustle culture grind set that a lot of older and more established artists just don't understand, and the fact that younger or newer artists oftentimes just don't realize our own limits until they bitch smack us in the face, and outside factors like illness, emergencies, plain old depression, it can be really easy to get stuck with a mile-long to-do list and a sense of overwhelming doom about getting out of it. Hopefully, this video can help other creatives specifically tackle that monster and keep themselves sane in the process. If you've got any tips on getting out of this sticky situation that you think I left out, or any methods I didn't mention, please share them in the comments for others to see. If you liked this video, it would mean a lot if you left a like, comment, or did any of the other stuff that YouTubers are contractually obligated to ask you to do. And speaking of contractually obligated, as always, my videos are sponsored by my lovely Ko-Fi and Patreon supporters. Without you, I literally wouldn't be here to do this. And a special thanks to my $5 and up patrons: Starlight Supernova, Arisark, Holmes, Chamomilion, Spirit of Stars, Ki Hiromaru, Miles Mentis, Hera, Lane, Lazy Admiral, Jordan Kirian, Kakrien, Leo, and HV Cax.